I think we're about ready to begin, everyone, so if you would turn your microphones on, please. All right. Welcome tonight to this joint meeting of the Town Council and South Kingstown School Committee. This is Thursday, February 20th. The time is 6:35. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Please rise. Join us.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And so we've got item number 2 on the agenda, which is the discussion regarding the school committee's requested FY 2020-2021 budget. I don't know if Rob or Linda, you want to start us off here?
Yeah, let me just kick this meeting off by noting that this is the first time we've had this meeting prior to the submission of the town manager's budget. And I wanted to have this meeting, and Linda and I had spoken about how we wanted to make sure that we were being as transparent and as offer as many opportunities for public comment and as much input and exchange between the school committee and the town council as possible. And this meeting is really just that. It's the opportunity for the town council and the school committee to talk about how the school committee came to the budget that's been submitted to the town manager on the 14th of February. And, I'll be listening closely to hear any feedback and thoughts from the council. And as we move toward the manager's proposed budget on March 1st, this is input now rather than sort of reaction to the manager's budget on March 1st. And with that, I would simply add just a couple of sort of congratulatory notes. You will notice that this year's school budget is significantly different than the school budgets that we've seen in the past. There's far more narrative and description of the programs than we've seen in the past. And there's a description of programs that in the past were not considered on budget. The entire federal revenue portion of the school budget in the past was not part of what was presented to the town council. I want to congratulate Linda and the school committee for a great step, in my view, toward better transparency and a more descriptive, more accessible document for the public. The budget they've presented would call for a 2% property tax transfer this year. That is what I and Linda and Marianne and Zach had talked about early in the process. And to be honest with you, I'm impressed with how they got there. This is not a sort of terrible, blood and gore kind of budget, but it does meet the target that we asked them to hit. How this fits in with the entire budget is something that we'll talk about on March 1st, but I will say that it's definitely a good step. So with that, Linda?
Thank you. Thank you for that, and for all your help helping us to get here. We started this conversation on December 16th, where we gave the kind of foundation of where we were starting to build. And so what we've tried to do is tell our story, and so I'll try to do that a little bit tonight. And then if anybody wants to join in from our team, please share. It has been a little bit of it's been a big journey along the way. I'm going to just share a couple things, and Rob and I had spoken this afternoon, and he had pointed out some things that were different, but then I guess for me they're really not different, so this is my baseline year. So, but I'll share kind of what I think as I compare and look back, or just things we've tried to focus on. So we began with a central focus for our budget. We began by looking at our current reality, the data that existed. That's what we had talked about in December here as well. So knowing then, therefore, what our focus areas needed to be as we moved. So based upon goals. We also built the budget with all funds as opposed to just the general fund. And so that means taking a look at the federal grants, taking a look at local grants, and taking a look at enterprise funds. And that's different. And I know that those pieces are not big. I get that. Like, I get they are a very small sliver, and we can think they don't have a large impact, but they do, because they all come together to put the puzzle together. So therefore, if you can work on a program being a special education program or an intervention program or a STEM program, if you can work on a program with multiple funds and have it work together, then you can really be thoughtful about your priorities, and you can maybe have some other things, I don't want to say cut them, but delay them and really focus on what those priorities are by leveraging all funds. So we tried hard to do that. We worked very closely with our administrative team. They were, and this year especially, I think, because there's a change in the law as of January 1 with site-based management. So it's really critical for all school departments to empower their principals. With that said, there's a level of professional development and ramp up that started. And for us, started with our legal team helping us to understand the law and provide the technical assistance, and then empower them with respect to what they need to know with the budget and work and partner with us. So that's on principals today, all across Rhode Island. We also used a budget subcommittee this year, so we're grateful to have a member of the town council on the budget subcommittee. We were able to examine things like high cost expenses, looking at different ways to present the budget, and considering presenting the budget to you all tonight and to the public in our report in multiple formats, and what pieces were important. Also, just things like, let's take a look at staffing trends over time, but let's not just look at the numbers, let's look at the changes and chart that out. So that's incorporated in the report. So that budget subcommittee, for me, worked really well, was powerful for us. I think I speak for Mary Ann as well. It was enjoyable. It was a nice way to have a discussion, and I hope it worked well for the school committee. We had 2 members from the school committee. It allowed us to report out. We did have budget work sessions as well, but we were able to kind of hone in more closely when we got to that point. And then I do think it also allowed us to focus on all the different areas of revenue and work with that more efficiently. So I was just going to walk through, I'll share this, I'm going to show a presentation. I think I linked it off of the website. The report that we're looking at, and there are hard copies here, so there's a report, and we'll walk through the report, but I have a presentation that pulled out key pieces of it. And then in addition, there is a summary level of the budget available as well. That is in the report, but we broke it out because the font size wasn't font size 1. So off of the school department's website under the finance and business, there's an FY21 budget information. And so on that page is this report. There's also the budget summary, and then there's also the presentation. So the presentation is again just a picto chart which pulls out high-level pieces of our conversation. So that's what I was going to just walk through tonight, and then and I know that we're going to meet again as well in a couple weeks. So if there are other aspects you'd like us to focus on, we can always pull those back, or I can share what I have tonight. So ultimately, as we rolled through the budget, we analyzed our data, and I think it was pretty clear when we took a look, even for you all here, if you remember, we looked at the report card data that was from the state, also our RICAS results and the PSAT, SAT, peeled back in data, enrollment data. So ultimately, we are working on our commitment to student learning, always grounded in the students, through a collaborative culture and continuous improvement. And ultimately looking at literacy, math, and social-emotional development for all students. And we know if we work on those differently abled, the subpopulation, and if we can close gaps there, then we will ultimately be able to raise the performance of all students. So, and then I did just reference in here, and I know I've spoken to it, what I felt was empowering was having the budget subcommittee for us. And I know we can do things, always do it better, but we walked, it was very helpful. So, and then everything, all of our decisions are grounded in fiscal management goals. Understanding that first as we build the budget, I think helped us to kind of have our norms, to know that while it's easy to walk in and want, but ultimately what do we need? And where are we going to achieve the notable return on this investment of our children? And help us to prioritize, grounded in goals, but to understand the enormous fiscal responsibility we have to the town. So our timeline, which I know you're all aware of, but ultimately today we're at our February and then walking into March timeline, where we'll continue to have our work sessions and then ultimately the hearings, which we've moved up a little bit on the calendar. Just a little airtime to move those to the 6th and 7th of April.
Technical note, the council has not yet voted to do that, but,
Okay.
but I don't think we have any problem.
Ultimately, our focus areas as we peel back, our priorities are our literacy and math development, closing the gap for our students, again, our social emotional learning and health curriculum, deep learning and 21st century skills. So that's your critical thinking, your creativity. This is really where we have an enormous lift in today's world, preparing our children through a different lens. Growing our STEM for all students, not just to kind of those who can fit it in. Understanding, again, that needs to be a priority for us. We've began working to strengthen our professional learning community work. That's how we work together as adults and grow continuously as adults, and really always ask, the first question is, what is it we want all children to learn and be able to do? And the work of a professional learning community has you ask that question every day, all day long. That's your number one goal, is answering that question and how we get there. Another big focus area in being able to support this budget is supporting the senior project and paper. Our language and culture, so which encompasses our dual language, but working to shift that to more of a lens of not continuing to support the dual language, but also support language acquisition for all children. And finally, our visual and performing arts. And really, we know that we have the responsibility to look at this carefully and thoughtfully under a magnifying glass. So I'm kind of like cutting right to the chase, but the organizational factors that I'm going to show you kind of the high level, and then we'll dig into the detail. But the revenues, kind of pieces that pop out from revenue when we look we have in this budget a property tax transfer request of 2%. We know that our state aid from last year to this year was reduced $700,000, $699, but $700,000. Our federal funds, we've have worked to reallocate them to support our goals. Everything's around those goals. We have an uptick in tuition from other students, welcoming other students from other districts to our district. A small increase in miscellaneous for the solar program, and then also we do continue to use fund balance this year, a little bit less than we used last year. And then the pieces, highlights, pull-outs from our expenditure perspective, we reduced expenses with the use of a lease program. This does fund the Smiles and Cares program, which had been cut previously. And they're not significant amounts of money when you're looking at such a large budget, but they do have significant impact for our children. This does fund the intramural program. There is a reduction in unemployment costs. There is a reduction of 1.4 certified staff based upon what we believe our projected need will be. The impact is done through retirements. There's a reduction of 3.0 teaching assistants based upon our projecting needs. Again, this is done but through unfilled positions currently. And then also we have an unfilled technology intern that we are going to move forward without. So I know in the report, there's a lot of different ways to look at enrollment, and I didn't want to regurgitate the report with the presentation, but just kind of pulled out, again, kind of cutting right to the chase. This is the enrollment that we are looking at for next year, based upon NESDEC, based upon the trends that we're seeing today, as much as you can see them in February. And then this is kind of that overall historical versus projected from a more significant report that NESDEC shares. NESDEC, the full report is available on our website in our documents. And I'm going to just speak a little bit about certified staff. I know, and show another trend. I know that I respect the fact that this is a huge piece of our budget. We are an organization that doesn't produce widgets. We help children learn and grow. So we are grounded in staffing. And I feel, and I know I am a teacher, I know I'm an educator, I'm married to an educator, but I read this quote, it resonated, and I've shared it with the school committee. Of all the occupations in America, there's just one profession, teaching, that impacts every human being in a daily and direct manner for what amounts to be 20% of an average person's life. And it's true. We know that our teachers are the closest to our children and have the largest impact to our children. We know that the needs they deal with are huge today. I was kind of crunching data, and I know you can see I always had 8 million windows open, and I had met with Kate one day, and we were looking at, peeling back the staffing and enrollment, but then looking at the needs of the children and realizing, well, for example, one kind of little, nugget, we saw a reduction in children of 2% from last year to this year, but we saw an increase of 504 plans, which are usually grounded in social emotional needs for children, around between 13 and 15%. So it's a significant increase. Even though you have a drop in enrollment, the needs of the children look different for us. I'm the first one. I always joke and say, I was in a counselor program. I was getting my master's in a counseling program and up through the stats class, loving it, and then the second class, people were crying, and I was like, this is not the place for me. I am not the touchy-feely, want to be in this, but you have to recognize the needs that we feel. You can walk through the hallways, talk to teachers, talk to our administrators, our teacher assistants, know that today's schools are different places and the supports needed for children are different. Research is also the transformation of the teaching force. The report shared in October, it was updated in 2018, shares that this is not what we see here, the uptick of staffing to the decrease of students is what we see across the nation. That's happening because of smaller class size, more STEM teachers, more special educators, and more ESL teachers. And those things are hit home here. We see similar needs here. With that said, we have to be responsible and analyze all the time the staffing that we have. So this isn't, we're presenting this is what our budget supports. Thinking about our staffing and how we leverage our federal grants to support them, thinking about our staffing and continuing to evaluate the needs of the children. We're not done tonight, check, we're good. This is ongoing every day of the school year for us. And I will say, sometimes when openings happen, when someone leaves, we analyze it, we pause the position. We don't, of course, a geometry teacher needs to be in front of the students. You don't pause for those children. But there are positions in the district that we are continuing to evaluate, and we don't automatically post and fill. And I've tried to lead by example with that.
Linda, on this chart, one of the things that is striking about it is the sort of counter-cyclical characteristic of it. Students seem to spike in places where employment goes down and employment seems to go up relative to teachers. I've looked at the numbers. It turns out that over this time period, for every 14 students we've lost on average, we've lost a certified staff. But it's very spiky, and it doesn't seem closely correlated. Any thoughts
I
on
thought the same thing, which is why I know this is a lot, and maybe if the numbers is my, I love numbers, so it's my thing, but I added the pre-K, I added the certified versus the non, so all staff includes certified and non-certified. To me, like looking at the certified versus the K-12, the blue line and like that darker brownish orange line, to me is really what we should be looking at. And it doesn't, it didn't, I actually, like I could open the spreadsheet now, I still have it open, because I thought I made a mistake. And I recharted it again and started from scratch and thought like, oh, there's a formula behind here somewhere, and cleared out this sheet. Yeah, the trend is not aligning, but I think it's important that we do work to align it. And I know, like I just said, well, social emotional has an impact. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Or
Is there a timing element here, though? Are we reflecting the same month for those data?
So this is at the, it's at the end of a school year. So it would be how we would have finished out with respect to a school year. So this is, the kind of concept of this, or at least this is my takeaway from our budget subcommittee. We were talking about, like, does our change in enrollment, like, what does it look like? Because we had raw numbers. What does it look like with raw numbers? But the raw numbers, I don't know, unless you color code them, it's not so fancy. It's hard to interpret. So here we did the percentage change and then thought, oh, if we graphed it, that would really kind of maybe tell a story or maybe confuse us more. So ultimately, are there any questions so far?
A couple of slides ago, there was a piece that I think is really important. We've talked about as a subcommittee, we've talked about as a school committee, and that's when you're comparing district to district, how it's really not comparing apples to apples, because some districts, just maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit, just for the town council, about how.
Well, so for example, I had brought this up at a school committee meeting when we went through the budget, maybe at our workshop. So for example, here we list out our staffing. But it was interesting to me having kind of a fresh set of eyes, because some of the staff here in my previous district would have, a kind of little bulk of them would have been consultants. So they wouldn't have been counted as FTEs. They would have been because we contracted out. So sometimes it's hard to compare staff to staff and say, oh, we have so much more staffing than District XYZ, because District XYZ, it's not that you don't pay for those people, you pay for them, they're consultants, but they're not coming out as an FTE.
I will point out for the council's awareness, Linda's also shown a willingness to look at what should be in-house and what should be outsourced. There's been a major change this year in the way that substitutes are treated, because she believed we can get to a more cost-effective substitute teacher program if we bring it back in-house. They're part-time employees. The benefits are not there. Some things may have benefits and really do belong outside, and those are open questions. They're not questions that are all resolved in this school proposal, but they're not questions that are off the table either.
And even collaborating,
Yep.
as we look forward, as we work together.
Comment to add, because on one of the slides, we mentioned that, the state aid was reduced this year by about $700K, which is, something that we've seen for several years now, and I think we're probably all eager to see what the next iteration of the funding formula will mean for us. And I'm assuming that we'll get into more detail here, but it's kind of eye-opening when you look at the actual state aid number. It's $4.5 million. Our transportation budget is $4.46 million. State aid gives us in excess of about $76,000 over what we have to pay for transportation, which amounts to about $26 per student. So it is, the financial burden, it's really tough, but it is largely on the shoulders of the community. And that in large part is due to our state aid within the funding formula. So I wanted to just point that out because when you just look at those numbers, it's pretty significant. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that when Linda mentioned that that the property tax, the request from the town is 2%, but what that actually amounts to for our budget is an increase of 0.76%, which I think is like a huge feat considering that, and maybe it's because the budget was really built from ground zero using just input, like site-based input from the leaders that said programmatically and building-based, this is what we need to educate our kids. And when we built it that way and viewed it multiple different ways and used a budget subcommittee to really kind of like carve it a few different ways and look at it a few different ways, that's where we landed, was 0.76%, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So I wanted to point that out as well, because the 2%, it's like a little bit of a groan, but when you look at what that actually means to the school budget, I think it's pretty fantastic.
Mrs. Savastano, can I just ask you a question about your graph, that one? So in the columns, I'm looking at 2019, 2020, just for example, and I see minus 7.37% with all staff and minus 6.93% for certified staff, et cetera. Is that minus 7.37% from last year? Okay. Okay.
Exactly.
The numbers needed to make sense to me, that's all.
From 18-19 to 19-20.
So from 17-18 to 18-19, there was a 0.81% increase. Okay, thank you.
Yes, exactly. For all staff that we have, yes. So for everybody listed on this would be what we would consider all staff, and then certified would be teachers, counselors, nurses. So just kind of piggybacking off of Stephanie, when you do look at our revenues, where our revenues come from, you're right. Like it is a heavy lift in South Kingstown. We have a heavy lift. So municipal, when we look at this, it's 90% is coming from local. It's not what you see in other towns.
Can I just make a comment on that? Of course. Along with what Ms. Kant just said regarding the transportation budget of $4.76 million, I'm not sure if all the community members are aware. I know the school committee is acutely aware of this, but in crafting the funding formula, which I have trouble calling it by the fair funding formula, which is what the official name is, transportation is just not included. And in crafting that formula, and I think that's part of why we get hit so badly, because we can't shrink the geography of the town. and that's where our excessive transportation budget comes from. I've had school committee members from other communities say to me, "Oh, Michelle, you must have the decimal point in the wrong place." No, I don't have the decimal point in the wrong place.
So this is just one view. This is a very high-level view, the highest level view that we present the budget in, but this is our projected revenues. And again, showing the different funds, so the general fund, enterprise fund, private donations, and then the restricted grants are the federal grants. And so when considering our funding formulas, just to add more overall, so we're in the final year. I guess that is the good news of this decrease. Not that we are feeling so confident about what the future will hold with respect to the funding from the state, but we know that at least this 10-year decrease, this is the kind of overall impact along the way. And we know this year is the $700,000 decrease. And then ultimately, again, our presentation of our expenditures from a comprehensive with all the funds included. So there is, I'm going to just speak for a minute. There's always a kind of conversation around per pupil. And per pupil is something that's calculated by the Department of Education, calculated by after your school year is complete and audited and finalized. And so for us, even our last year's data is not available for our per pupil from the Department of Ed. So, but if we go back to the year before and take a look at the dollars and the breakdown of a per pupil, and then take a look at how we broke down at what we call the function level from the Uniform Chart of Accounts, we do see that, so the last year that we all talk about the high per pupil is the 17-18. And when we look at that year, 70% of the funds were directly in direct support of students, teachers, classrooms, schools, and learning resources. So I understand that it's a challenging conversation and folks want a lower per pupil. And I understand that there are ways we can get there, and we will get there. But with that said, I have to say that we have a community that puts the dollars closest to the children. And I do think that is something that we should all celebrate. Because often you'll see high per pupil, and you will not necessarily see the dollars right with the children. You might, so it is what it is. But I do think that I needed to kind of see that when we're looking at our, now as we move forward, wanting to make sure that we're still impacting kids directly. So right now we see for this year, for our FY21, that expenditures, of course, we're seeing again the 54%, the majority of our budget is salaries.
Linda, just one quick thing that we had talked about before, but the per pupil, I think it's not just what it is because, or not, that is what it is that part of that is due to some of the high cost expenditures that we have looked at, like special ed, how much it's costing us in South Kingstown to educate our special education students versus what other towns are, and sort of taking a deep dive into what's making up that number, because that is influencing our overall per pupil. So it's not something that is being left as, status quo. We have a high per pupil in South Kingstown, but it's something that as a team, we're doing a deep dive into to try to see if there's something we could do about that number. And it looks like, or work has been actively being done on that.
Yes, working with the Department of Education, on that. So there's per pupil, and then there's also a per pupil that they break down for special education costs. And we come out top 3 in the state on that cost. Now, overall, though, the special education budget is comparable to like districts. But so what it is it's the divisor, the number they're using to divide it. And I've been back and forth with the Department of Ed, and they've not given me a clear, they don't seem to know the answer of why. They're dividing by the services we provide for children. So I don't understand why we have a similar number of students to similar sized districts. We spend a similar amount. So if it's, 1 year like 12 million for special education, similar to other like districts, then why is our per pupil so much higher? If we spend 12 million, another district spends 12 million, we're all servicing 350, 400 children. Why is our per pupil 112 a child and theirs is 50,000? Like, what's that? So the answer was, well, that's the services we provide. We report our services twice a year. What about it? How are you calculating it? By minutes, by hours, by staffing, and they've not gotten back to me, so that's where I am on that. So when you put out a number publicly and it's a headline, and it bothers me that we can't peel back the formula yet on that. But I'm comfortable continuing to ask them questions about it. So ultimately, our budget request and kind of the breakdown of our budget. And then I just want to kind of show again what Stephanie was. This is just taking the budget document and kind of flipping it a little bit to take a look, because it was something we had analyzed in our process. We made sure on all of our documents that we had the percentage difference from last year to this year, just because it's a quick way to kind of skim the document. But our state aid is reduced by a little over 13%. But ultimately, our total expense is up 0.76%. And then you can see that some of the other differences in the changes that we see. So, for example, Rob had spoken earlier about the substitutes not being contracted out that way anymore. So those kinds of things, you would see a shift in how we are charging it off and a percentage change, or ultimately not purchasing equipment but leasing it instead. So those kinds of categories will see some shifts. So the more detailed version of this is available in the budget. This is at the function level, at the function code level. And the other, kind of the last piece on the document is a table, and the table has the codes so that when folks are looking at the function level of the budget, they can look up what it means. And that was something else that kind of came out of the budget subcommittee, because you can take a look, and I guess we can, do we understand when we see, stipends 51404, but now we can go to see what the Uniform Chart of Accounts, the definition clearly is for that.
Great. So, Mr. President, if I may, I'd just like to sort of put some context around. I'm sorry, Linda, are you?
No, I'm done. I can kind of.
Yeah, and
please.
But some context around this. The property tax transfer that the school committee has made with this budget request is a 2% property tax transfer. That gets them to a total budget increase of 0.76%. The rate of inflation over the course of the last year has been 2.3%. So both the actual operating budget increase and the request for the increase in the amount over last year is less than inflation, without a fight. I mean, this is actually really good news. especially since when you consider the property tax transfer that is being requested is really less than half, again, what the state has taken away. The state reduction this year is $699,000, $700,000. And their additional request is less than half that again, or not that again, not twice that. So it's really, in my estimation, a very good starting point. My concerns are long-term. This is the end of the 10-year. We've hit the floor on the 10-year crash on the state side. But we know we're going to be climbing up a hill as soon as we start looking at debt service. And $700,000 lost this year is going to be nothing compared to $2 million a year in debt service. So we're in a good place right now. We need to consolidate this year. We need to be devising strategies for financing a future where the pain is going to be greater than the pain we endured in the last of the 10-year reductions by the state.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the superintendent?
I have a few questions. Looking at the operational expenses, salaries are increasing by approximately $1.1 million. Is that generated by contractually driven increases, or are those discretionary? Okay. Another question in regard to professional services. You're anticipating a decline of $800,000 approximately. Can you kind of describe to us why you're anticipating such a decline?
That was specifically what Linda just spoke about and Rob also mentioned.
So previously you had consultants that were outsourced, which made
Right.
up $800,000 more in the previous year than you anticipate in this upcoming budget. Is that correct?
The substitutes were contracted out.
Yes.
We're bringing them back in-house.
Okay.
So
So that also contributes to an increase in the salaries?
Correct.
Okay.
But, I mean, that's worth spending some time on. The outsourced the outsourced program for substitute teachers was $800,000, more or less. There's a profit built into that contract, which made sense if you were looking for the efficiency of not managing schedules and those sorts of things. Linda believes at this point she can spend just over $500,000, bring it back in-house, and do the management of scheduling in-house. So we're saving $300,000 on management costs. That's what we end up with.
So we would also look, so for example, when we work on professional development, curriculum, and we have substitutes for that, we would look at supporting that with federal grants as well instead of general fund. And then the other piece is the service in and of itself. And we have a lot of folks that are frustrated. So if we were getting a great service today and we were so happy with it, it probably wouldn't have even been considered. Or it would have been considered just from a financial aspect. But I think there's two pieces here. Like, you're paying for something, and are you happy with it? And so we weren't happy with the subcontracting. So it feels like it's worth it for us to try it ourselves internally.
So the $500,000 represents the salaries, or the salaries plus the management of the program? Because you'd have to have someone to do the management of this, right?
So we currently use a system called Frontline ASOP, and that you still would use a system. We just wouldn't have a contracted service helping, and there will be some level of a burden on administrative staff. But we're going to try to. We shouldn't have to hire more administrative staff. So I came from a district that didn't have a contracted service, and we kind of thoughtfully did leverage the administrative staff that we had. So we trained them, we had them help. It wasn't just central office either, it was building level with principals' help supporting that. But they also had a little more control over who they were bringing into the building. You could kind of train those folks, because you had, It wasn't, and we have some control over that now, but it feels a little frustrating for people. I had thought previously about going to a contracted service. Ultimately, the substitutes were so happy we didn't, they became very loyal to our district. And I don't know if the substitutes here are happy or not happy with the contracted service. Usually, they'd rather work directly with the school district. And then you kind of a bang for that as well, because you have substitutes that are happy, committed, and want to come to your school every day instead of trying to find coverage, and you can't find coverage. And so that we're going to try it. It feels like it's well worth a try, and because I have lived it for 16 years in my previous position, I feel like I have some experience.
My concern was the burden on the administration.
Yes.
Does it, make you have to provide more support, or support staff, even for the administrators who are now going to be in charge?
Yeah, it feels like we should be able to, with our staff, figure it out. There are things, so for example, I think it's no secret, I would like to have, for example, if you bear with me for a sec, centralized enrollment. So when a new family moves to the district, I would like them to come to central office. That's a staff member that I'd like to pull in, an administrative staff member. We've talked about that in the funds moving forward. So right now we do K through 4, we do at central office. If you have children in multiple buildings, secondary, you go to those different sites and register. Welcome to South Kingstown. You're driving all over. It's not a kind of a thoughtful welcome. We do the best we can. So it feels like if I pull that registration away from those larger buildings and we centralize that, then maybe those buildings can pick up the sub-management. Do you know what, so if we can look at what we're actually doing all day and maybe leveraging that in different ways, it feels fair.
So, Linda, just one question on the logistics of it, and maybe it's Marianne. How do you anticipate timekeeping and payroll for the new subs being done? Through our standard systems?
Yeah. Keep in mind that the subs were in-house a few years ago.
Right.
So what we'll do is, what we anticipate doing is running like a job fair, late March, early April. We'll then have to re-enter those folks. Those folks will have to go through the MUNIS system, put in, and then ASOP is what they sign in on. So if someone is subbing, it's an ASOP. And then ASOP, we take that off and put the subs in through the payroll system.
Just for awareness, that does mean that there's an additional burden on finance here on the town side. It's not a burden that is overwhelming, but I want folks to know we're locked at the hip in these things. It's not that you can do something on the school side and it doesn't affect us as well. We're aware of the burden. It's not one that we're worried about. I'd rather have this burden, this experiment, and a 2% property tax transfer request than a 2.3 property tax transfer and the workload we've got. So this is a good proposal.
If the school committee was given less than a 2% increase in the property tax transfer, what operational expenses would be targeted to be reduced, and what would that entail?
We would go back and review that from a kind of programmatic perspective. It's not, but I'll tell you, so I gave you the focus areas that we're focusing on. So when we talk about STEM or the language and culture areas, or those, when I went through that list in the presentation, and it's in this document as well, those would most likely be the areas, because those are the areas that we're supporting in this budget.
So I'm looking at the budget statement. The top two line items are, contractually driven fixed expenses that, from my interpretation, will be difficult to cut back on. That leaves about 4 or 5 underneath that for which you would have to target to decrease.
Where are you looking?
I'm looking at the expenditure statement.
Are you on a page in the report? Yeah, which version?
Yep.
So when you look at programs are supported by staffing as well. So I guess I'm confused. So when you're looking at supporting, I don't want to kind of put random, when you put, any program has staffing associated to it. So there can be reductions in staffing. Would it have an impact to our children? Absolutely. But when you go back, we all know that where we have dollars are with staff. That's where the largest piece of our budget. But I never have been the kind of person to say 5% across the board. It's looking at something from a program perspective. Each program has a budget, and what is that budget, and what does that budget need to be reduced? It's not saying 5% across every building or 5% across all staff.
So unsure at this time.
Well, we know the areas. If we were charged to do that, we would go back and figure it out as a team. I wouldn't do it by myself. We didn't build this by myself. Yeah. And it would be dangerous for me to kind of, I'm always thinking, I'm always, kind of trying to plan out, be consequential in my thoughts, but it wouldn't seem like it would be fair for me to kind of alarm folks. I've tried to not alarm. This is my burden. At the end of the day, this is a huge responsibility, and I understand that, but it didn't feel right this year to alarm folks, so to kind of plop out a few programs that could be on a chopping block wouldn't feel fair right now.
Okay. Thank you.
This was, I think we talked about it the last time that we met, that the way that the team built this budget was starting in each building and talking about what the needs of the kids were in that building and what the anticipated needs of the kids were going to be for September, and then built the staffing and the whole budget around that. So in conversations where we discussed what was going to happen if, this doesn't move forward, Linda had said that it would involve going back and starting, with the teachers and with the building administrators and making decisions at that level and then moving forward through the whole process again. So it's really not line items to slash. It's more looking at what the program looks like in each one of the buildings. Does that help?
Linda, just a couple of questions about the revenue. On your tuition income, you're showing, it's not a huge, but it's, a significant increase. What's going on? Why do we think we're going to see more tuition? Why do we think we're going to have more CTEs coming in?
We are anticipating a couple of more tuition in kids coming in for our CTE programs, based on what we have in enrollment and what we've had with applications.
So it's a trend, and you're anticipating it'll continue.
Correct.
Okay. On the fund balance use, this is the one thing about the budget that makes me nervous. This is the one thing about your budget that I've been showering it with praise because I actually think you really have done a great job with a difficult set of circumstances. This one piece makes me nervous. What is the fund balance? Should we draw this down as proposed here?
The current fund balance is unassigned is $2.6 million.
Yep.
So I'm still comfortable with this as it currently stands. Hopefully with the funding formula 10 years over, hopefully we can start whittling that number down because I think we need to.
And on the miscellaneous increase, the miscellaneous revenues, is that the solar program that we're seeing?
That is the solar
Look
program.
at that. You see that? Programs over on our side are paying for the schools every way they can.
Well, I think this year we received like about $35,000, and based on the timing and stuff like that, we'll have a couple of more months. So
that's great.
That was a wonderful program that was been put in place. And
yeah, it's nice to see the dividends coming back.
yeah, exactly.
Were those both your questions, Rob?
Yes, I'm sorry.
You said that the burden for the municipal side on our district is about 90% of the funding. And you said that that's not what you see in other districts. Do you have a comparison? Like, what is typical and what are similar districts experiencing in terms of the municipal burden? I don't know if you have those numbers tonight, but eventually I'd like to see those. Right, yeah, I'm sure it varies. And beyond maybe looking at the municipal burden, what the state contribution is. I know it's 7% here this coming year. What is it in Charlestown? There it is. Be interested to see.
You mentioned earlier there's an uptick in the tuition income, a pretty healthy one. I imagine the expense for tuition to other districts is in one of the other buckets. Do you have that number?
Yeah, this year, I can direct you to where that number is, and also I can explain, there is an uptick in it. Not as significant as we thought we would see, or as high as other years. The big uptick is related to the CTE program that Narragansett School District has. The reason why the uptick isn't as significant, we're finally with a full year class. So we now have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. Currently we have 3 or 4 seniors in the class that'll be graduating. And we've been averaging anywhere from 12, 13 students in the underclasses. So we don't expect to see that much. And that number is, it says at Voc Ed tuition. It's account number, it's under other purchase of services. It's account number 55610. And this year we're budgeting about just slightly under 20% increase. So it's 1.6 million, 1.66 for an increase of from 1,390,000. So an increase from 1.4 to about a 1.67.
So our tuition expense out is 1.6 million, in is 159,000.
It's less than that, because also included in that tuition is this amount is a small amount, is the preschool tuition, but that's a small amount. Kids coming in, we anticipate about $17,000 to $18,000.
And I'm sure it's in a bucket somewhere, but building maintenance, is that, do you know the number for that in the proposed budget?
Built-in maintenance is throughout the budget, depending on what it is. So we do have supplies, which is in the 5,600 line items, and we do have maintenance supplies also in that. And obviously we have the maintenance staff. And then there is one other line item under, if you look specifically at the 54313, which is a maintenance repairs. I'm sorry, that's vehicles. General maintenance, I'm sorry, it's 54311 and 312.
On page 47.
Yeah. Do you have those numbers in front of you? I just don't.
Yeah. General maintenance is just over $200,000. We have groundskeeping of $130,000.
Yeah, I'm not looking. I think what I'm driving at is we know that RIDE eventually is going to force us to put 3% away, and so I'm not looking at window washing. I'm looking at upkeep, building upkeep. Do you have a feel for what that number is in this budget?
So what happens with the maintenance request, the 3% of the step up as they go through? Yeah. What they allowed us to include in is also all the maintenance staff. So all the maintenance staff is also included in that, as well as the groundskeeping will be included in that. It also includes any work that we're doing that's the major capital expenditures. The Peacedale parking lot of $500,000 that we're doing in anticipation of next year counts as to meet that 3%. The vestibules that we just did this year to the tune of 900 and change, 950,000, will apply for us to meeting the maintenance for this year.
And so are any of those expenses bonded?
Yes, they are.
So it's a town responsibility. It's not going to be seen in this budget.
Councilman Veely, you're exactly right, and we've been having this conversation. This is going to be part of that, what we figure out going forward, because just as the debt service is going up, and by the way, the state statute allows that debt service payment to be tied. So our anticipated debt service payment on a project of $85 million would take care of the 3%. We need not to do that. We need to do something other than that going forward. And going forward, we need to make sure that the presentation of the maintenance costs is clear. I would suggest this is another place where, there's room for improvement over time. This is something that we're going to want to break out. We're going to want to see all of those disparate pieces scattered throughout the budget pulled into one number, because the state's going to require it. So we're going to have that number. It's not
more than that, I think it's important that the taxpayer is paying on the town side the bond and the increase in the property tax transfer. I just would like a clear number. And then secondly, if we count the bond payments toward our 3% and it covers it, we're going to be here again with buildings that are not maintained. So
we all agree with that,
it's
and we have to figure that problem out, because the debt service is going to hit us. We're going to have to pay it.
Right.
And we're going to have maintenance issues that will have to be addressed even after going through the schools with a facilities project. We are going to have to report that correctly, and we're going to have to make sure that our accounting is correct on that as well. I am concerned that we not just push what are properly understood as school expenses to the municipal side, and thereby prevent expenditures that the police need to make, prevent expenditures that need to be made in other municipal programs. We can't have a situation where there's $2.5 million worth of debt service that benefits the school program at the expense of all other programs, and also have maintenance costs that drive the program on the school side up. We're going to have to figure that problem out. That is exactly the challenge that I was alluding to before when I said we're in a good place this year, but this is the base from which we've got to start building.
Okay, and
much more accustomed to including that. So, like, when I had shared this piece, I'm used to having the general operational funds, the restricted funds, the enterprise funds, and the capital improvement funds all as part of the budget.
Right. And then we have to be sure that we maintain what we have improved. I'm going to ask for a little data that I know you'll bring back to me, because I don't expect you to have it off the top of your head. But when I do the quick math, and I was educated here for a while, so trust me, the student-to-staff ratio is 6.3, and the certified and support staff ratio is 7.8 student to educator. I'm wondering how that compares with other districts. I don't expect you to have that, and I don't expect that we should be comparing to, urban districts, but like districts. And I wonder how that staffing ratio rates or ranks with similar districts. And I think of North Kingstown, Portsmouth, maybe Westerly, similar type districts.
It's just, and I will, and if there are specific districts, it's easier if I know a specific district, because we can draw that down from Department of Ed and look at those and chart it out over time. But then just remember what I had shared before. So we're including, for example, occupational therapists and physical therapists as an FTE, and we report them accordingly, where someone else, like Portsmouth, contracts out for those.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Just like your per student cost is hard to compare because some districts figure or report differently, but nobody can argue that $23,000 a student is not high. So, so I understand that there are different ways to report that make these numbers. It's not exact, but if somebody is at 10 and we're at 6, we should know that. I think the only other comment I'll make is last year we went through the process and it was a tough process last year. I remember that a lot of us were not frustrated but challenged. At the end of the process, we had what turned out to be, I think, a maximum property tax increase. As a matter of fact, we took $160,000 out of debt service, I think, because of something that was a little funny in one of the meetings, not funny in one of the meetings, but we figured something a little off. After that, I think it was even in the summertime, long after the budget was finished. I think it was, and I might get some of these facts wrong, so let me have it. The school committee asked the interim superintendent to see if they could find some funds so that we can call back some staff. And I think the interim superintendent found $510,000. And at that point, the explanation that I remember from the interim superintendent was, we were working from 3 cut lists and we just used the one that gave us the money back. So I want to, is anything not accurate so far? Because I'll stop. I'd love to be proved wrong, not proved wrong.
So Linda's at something of a disadvantage. She wasn't here at the time.
I understand.
My understanding of what happened comports with your explanation up to the point of, I don't know what Bob Hicks had to say about that cut. I don't know anything about it.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't actually remember, and I could not also have it right, the school committee saying, interim superintendent, find money and save some positions. I thought that, if I remember correctly, he was working through what was a very complicated, messy process we don't necessarily need to get into right now, and trying to figure out how to proceed.
And believe me, I want to avoid that this year.
Yeah, thank you. And in the meantime, recognize that he was able to find some funds to restore some positions. I don't remember that we directed him to find it, but if someone thinks I'm wrong.
And I may have that wrong. I think I'm going by newspaper accounts and a 64-year-old memory. But the bottom line is, when all was said and done, we had this, fur-flying interaction, it was $500,000 more somewhere. So how does that happen? We really haven't sat down.
I think something interesting to point out, though, is that when you approach your budget process in the fashion of looking what we had last year and then just finding areas to cut, you end up with a cut list. And you end up with inconsistencies and you end up off target because you're just focused on where can you make cuts. And it's not really built from the goal of those focus areas where we're prioritizing 12 different areas of where the dollars are tied to the kid. So I haven't seen a cut list. There isn't a cut list. It's because it was built from, we didn't start with last year and cut things from it.
No, I understand that. And actually, I think your cut list came last year from our series of hearings.
Right.
And I'm not looking for blame. I'm looking to understand the process that.
Right. It's just a different process this year, I think.
That's a very, I understand that process. I've lived that process before. I don't enjoy that process. It's also not how I was trained. There are best practices to building a school budget, and and bringing a community through that journey is not something I would enjoy doing. That's not a best practice.
Nobody did enjoy it.
With that said, I'm not saying this can be better. It is what it is. I know it can be better. We are doing the best we can today, and we will every day. This isn't budget season and we're done. Every day is budget season. But with that said, it is transparent, and if there's a big problem tomorrow, there's no padding in here to save the day. So I'll be coming to Rob and saying, full disclosure, I can't save my own day. And I think some superintendents in some districts, they are concerned for that. You feel very vulnerable. I feel very vulnerable today, saying so if you say come, cut, it's not going to be an enjoyable conversation behind closed doors. It's not something that I want to bring a community through needlessly, though. It will be thoughtfully and because we have no other choice. But this is, I'm not saying, this is transparent.
No, and I wasn't questioning this year's process. This really is the first time we've had the opportunity to sit together since that last series of budget hearings, Rob sort of backs up that my recollection is pretty close. And so maybe the question is to Mary Ann, because she was here last year and probably the only administrator that was.
As I remember it, Dr. Hicks had provided the school committee with a memo shortly after he came on, and I don't remember exactly the specifics, so I just wouldn't want to speak out of turn. But what I recall, and I could look back through my emails to get the specifics, is that we were provided with a memo that when he went through the budget, when he first came on, that he found pockets of money where there were differences in terms of health insurance, what we had anticipated in terms of increases and what the reality was, and there were a few different areas like that. And I could pull up the memo and forward it to you so that you would have the specifics, but that isn't the way that this is done. We asked that.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning this year's. I guess what I'm saying is, because your presentation was great. How does that happen? So how are there little pockets of $500,000 after this?
I'm going to offer an observation about budgeting in general in bureaucracies. It is a well-known and well-practiced habit of bureaucracies to squirrel away money to protect the program. If agencies don't believe that their program is going to be protected in difficult circumstances, they'll squirrel the money away. If we can't trust Town Hall to help us if we need it 6 months from now, we'd better be able to do it ourselves. And I think that that's what you were seeing in the previous budgets. I will say that Linda's budget this year is more transparent. I have had better conversations. We've had a better working relationship with the schools than I have in the last 2 years. It's not perfect. We both know that there are more places where we can look for efficiencies and improvement. Now, I have to take her lead on that. It's her program. But those lines of communication, those conversations are going to happen throughout the year, and we're going to get to a better place, in large part because we have to. We cannot be looking at this and saying, great, everything's all set. We've got a 2% property tax transfer in 2020, and all is well with the world. We know we're going to have dramatic increases in expenditures that are equal and greater than what we've seen in the past in terms of the declines from the state funding. We're going to have to address that. We're going to have to address a change in the way we do our budgeting on the school side so that we really account for in a meaningful way the school maintenance costs. That's part of what got us to the problem we're in, and we do not. Linda doesn't, I certainly don't, we do not want to be there again. So the way, if I had my druthers, the schools would be owned by the town, and the school committee and the school department would pay rents because we'd have a price point for every square foot. We'd have a way to we can't do that. So we've got to come up with a metric like price that or at least an accounting mechanism that allows us to make sure that those things are considered not just somebody else's problem. And again, we are starting those conversations. We're beginning to build systems there. There may be opportunities, one of the items on the agenda, and we're sort of morphing into that conversation, and I'm happy to do it. There may be opportunities for us to consolidate facilities management over time. There may be some places where we can do better coordination of those services. Right now, our biggest challenge is they're different unions and they're very different maintenance programs. We've got to modernize the town building facilities maintenance program, and we know we have to do the same on the school side. So we all know there are challenges. We know there are places for efficiencies. We're addressing the ones for facilities, and that's probably our best shot. But you can understand why the taxpayer would be a little leery about what has transpired, and going forward with what you've just said, that we know that certain departments protect themselves.
So can I also jump in and say, we can say this is a starting off point, and it is a starting off point, obviously, for Linda, because this is her first cycle, but it's not a starting off point for Joe because it's not his first, it's not my first, it's not the community's first. And how we got here with where, I think, if you don't mind me speaking for you a little bit, where his concern might lay is that we've been at the 2% number or around it for probably 5 or 6 years now, but every year it's been, okay, we'll do 2% this year, but we're going to try really hard not to do it next year. And that's what kicked off the facilities review in the first place, far before the money, came from the state. And so we went through the whole budget process differently, and we're still at 2%. So I hear your concern, and I get where he's coming from. And also, so that you don't think you're crazy, yes, the $500,000 last year, like, where did it come from? Right. So you're not alone with that.
I did find the memo. It's from June 7th. And if, just give me a second. And I agree with you as well. Like, why were we fighting over Smile and CARES?
$30,000, right.
And then $500,000 was found. And that was beyond frustrating, I think, for everybody in the community. And when Linda came on, that was really a priority for me to make sure that, and I think for everybody, that we don't go through that we're not presenting sort of a false narrative that the numbers are real numbers. But just to answer your question, Dr. Hicks' memo states that the money was found after comparing salaries of the previous year retirees to their replacements. That's where savings were found. And, sorry, my phone is really small. Do you have it? Again, not really relevant to this year, but I do have an answer for you if we can get to it. It's several pages long.
So, Kate, part of the answer to the question, though, why can you be at 2%, 2%, 2% and not get improvement, is that, first of all, last year we were at 3.9, not 2, and the year before that we were at 3.3. So you're right. We keep coming, yeah. But what's different is that, so first of all, 2% is sort of where inflation is anyway. It's the price of gasoline going up 2%. It's the price of, food going up 2%. It's the cost of living adjustment for all things. So 2% is sort of a natural place for budgets to end up. It may not be the only thing that drives it, but the general increase in prices should drive us toward 2%. What's happening in the discussion this year that has not happened before is a realization that it's not good enough just to hit inflation and be status quo. There really was a look at systems this year. We looked at the outsourcing of substitutes, and that's an important shift. There was an attempt to bring things like the cost of copiers out to a lease. There were changes in the way the system was being viewed. The objective was not here this year to maintain the system, but rather to figure out how the system could be modified. Going forward, if that continues, we've got hope for figuring out how to do this right in the long run.
All right, so I get all that. I get all that, but if we still came to the same number, even is in the question for the people who have lived it year after year after year after year. Why do they trust one process over the other if it comes to the same range, right? Especially when we look at, I'll speak a little out of turn on this topic, but when we look at, we still have 7 buildings, 2 of which are half full, and we're going to be in that same predicament for the next 2 to 3 years, plopping a bond on top of it.
So the question in the community, I think, has always been the declining enrollment and the increase, the 2% increase, right? So that's where the divergence comes in mindsets. We've got a 5% drop in enrollment projected, right? 2890 you're at right now, 89 down to 2801. That's about 5%, right? Somewhere in that range, 4%, and a 2% increase. So I think we need to explain to the community why that's happening. And I think if we can do that, we're going to I don't know, improve the perception of the 2% increase.
We're again forgetting the fact that the state funding is declining year over year. So the 2% increase has to be taken that into consideration too.
That's the explanation we need to afford the community able.
But we keep going over this, and it's like we forget it every time we bring it up. So, and we talk about it each time as well. So if we look at a 2% increase from the property tax transfer, it's much less of an increase in terms of the overall budget. If you look at this year, the proposed budget at $61,856,830, compare that to 2015 when it was $59,144,000. Somebody can do the math here on that, but that's not a 2% increase year over year.
So I'm not going to do the math for you, but so this is only my second time going through the budget process, and I wasn't on the budget subcommittee, the folks who really came up with dug deep into the details. I think that was Kate and Emily maybe. But as a school committee member, I found it much easier to understand how we were getting to the numbers. I felt that they were real numbers. Everything felt much more transparent this year. And there are additions, like seeing the difference in the proposed budget for 2020/21 and this year. We can see on the website, I think it's there, how the budget breaks down by school. We can look at and analyze the budget from very different angles, and I hope that what's different this year what feels different for me, being able to look at and understand the real numbers from so many different angles. I hope that's true for town council, and I hope it's true for the public too, so that we can answer these questions very honestly about why we need the 2%, if that makes sense.
So if I can just piggyback on what Deb had to say, the challenge that we have is that it's the local contribution that's being raised. We understand that the overall spending is below inflation. We understand that this process is much more transparent, and I think the presentation was dramatically better. But the local burden is who we have to answer to. So you can have a flat budget, but if you ask for 3% more, we have a challenge asking for that from the local taxpayers. It's true that the state aid has gone down, but the local taxpayer doesn't care. Their contribution is 2% more.
Of the RIASC, professional development sessions that I've gone to, they state very clearly that RIDE finds the responsibility for public education to be that of the local municipality.
Can I interrupt you for a sec?
Yeah.
Then take away your mandates. Take away your mandates if you're going to make us pay for everything.
Right. So it's a no, don't say that. There are really, it's very important, the work that like Sarah and Michelle do when they're working with our legislators to see what we can do to have a stronger voice at the State House to shine a light on some of these areas that are really putting members of the community in a position where maybe the burden is too great, and we're looking at situations where are we pushing people out of town because the tax burden is too great. But they're pretty clear when they say that when it comes to who is responsible for funding public education in Rhode Island, it's the local municipality and not the state.
Yeah, but they don't feel that way in a lot of communities in Rhode Island, and I have a hunch that part of the reason that we see our state funding going down is they perceive us as A, being better able to afford it than other communities, and B, they view us as an inefficient system, that we're not being as efficient as we can be. It's a hunch on my part, don't put it in ink, but That's two of the problems.
So when do we get to a point where the decrease in state aid is such that, or the total percent of our budget that comes from the state is so minuscule that we can say, take away your mandates?
Now,
I'm with you.
Well, if it were an option, the 4.5, it's not. If it were an option, we could probably save the $4.5 million that we are getting this year by ignoring mandates, but it's not an option.
no, I get it. They're unfunded mandates. I understand the whole process, but I'm telling you, the person that's challenged paying their property taxes cares this much.
As we are moving forward, though, as we're discussing the bond and our efficiencies, I do think it's important to highlight that we are moving toward a more efficient building usage with the current plan that we have and that's been voted to move forward. So when you think about our current high school, that's out of all of the buildings that we have, it's our largest and our most inefficient space, especially when you're looking at space that's used directly for student instruction and learning. So we've got the Hazard Building and you've got the Columbia Street property. And if you add those two square footages up and then you look at the Curtis Corner High School plan, and you subtract those two numbers, we're actually going to be taking off about 98,000 square feet of space that we have to heat, that we have to care for, that we have to upkeep. So I do think that's important to note. Obviously, the bond is a big piece, but we are moving towards operationally each year taking care of 98,000 square feet. And that's a significant amount when you think about something that is not going to affect our student outcomes or our student learning.
I think that those are important points. I'd be careful. It's hard for us to really understand what the cost efficiency of the projects that we're contemplating is. $85 million is going to be debt with us for 20 years, so we have to factor that into, what we're really giving up. We haven't actually yet got plans for not having to heat empty buildings. We're not there yet. We may end up there, and we're hoping to end up there soon. But we can't count chickens on cost savings and on the efficiency of programs until they've hatched.
Well, surely we don't have a definite plan, but my point is that we're not looking to move forward in an inefficient manner. The plan is to be looking at all ways to be as efficient as possible as we move forward.
It's a great objective. It's a hard one to achieve because there's trade-offs throughout. If we were to build a new structure that was 2 or 3 stories high, it would be energy efficient. If we have to build a single level structure that is an acre of roof, it's much less efficient. We're going to have inefficiencies in our system. I think that I hear you and I hear Linda saying we're trying to minimize those inefficiencies as we go forward. It isn't.
We have those inefficiencies now. That's not a new thing. So we're inefficient.
That's
we're
right.
Moving towards trying to be as efficient as possible.
I just want to be careful about not saying, I don't want to be heard, and I don't think the school department should be understood as saying we're using the magic words. We recognize that this isn't a straight line. Just because we want to achieve it doesn't mean we're going to achieve it. We have to achieve it through hard work. It's going to be difficult. If we're going to make up $2.5 million worth of debt service in the programs, theirs and ours, we're going to have to work to do it.
Yeah, and the other point I'll make is this budget is a great first step in operational efficiencies. You've done some things in this budget that have increased efficiencies just with the substitute change, not outsourcing and doing it in-house. So it's a good first step, and I think we should keep going in that direction. The whole facilities discussion, for me, is another discussion. I mean, that, and I agree with Rob that we're not going to factually quantify tonight that there's going to be this X number of dollars savings because we've gone to this new facilities plan.
For sure. The only reason that I bring it up is because during this discussion, it's been brought up several times that as we're moving forward, if we're looking at a 2% increase, what are we going to be doing in terms of being more efficient? Yep. So I do think it's important to bring it up, that is a conversation that's actively being had. Yep. And I hear you on that and other people that have brought that up. But for sure, I do not think we should be getting into the weeds tonight about what actual numbers are, but looking at overall what the high level there is and what the goal is.
It's a great goal. That's a good, I'm glad you used that word. Do you want this?
Rob, I got a question for you in regard to potential consolidation of services or systems between the municipal and school departments. What areas exist for consolidation and what kind of savings can be yielded?
So the first one that we are already working on, although I will tell you we've not had as much success as I'd like, we had initially 4 months ago sat down together and said we're going to do joint procurement. We're going to start working as a procurement team, looking for places where if you're going to go out and buy toilet paper and we're going to go out and buy toilet paper, we'll buy toilet paper together and hopefully be able to buy it in bulk and save money that kind of way. But more importantly, we hoped that by having more eyes on the contracts and on the RFPs and on the documents, we would avoid waste. We'd avoid errors. We'd avoid problems in our contracts. That is a sound idea. It's a great thing for us to be doing. We have moved in that direction. We're beginning to operate more like a procurement team. We're not there yet. We're stuck in our own habits. We have our budget to put together. They have their budget to put together. The business office over there does budget and contracts. The finance office over here does budget and contracts. So we haven't quite figured out how to gel that procurement team. But I'm very hopeful that will yield savings and cost avoidance over time. I'm particularly interested in our pursuing this and getting it right before we start doing contracts on multi-million-dollar construction contracts. Right now, I'll say it, and I mean no disrespect to the folks in either shop, right now we are not up to snuff. I don't trust either shop, and I don't mean to be too harsh or too critical, to manage multi-million-dollar construction contracts 5 and 6 at a time. I think that it's a very complex set of contracts that we're contemplating going forward, and we don't have the staff, numbers of staff, we don't have the expertise and the training that we need to do those as well as we should. We need to get the contracting team up and running in an effective way, and then I think we avoid problems. I think that we've lost money in contracts over the last few years because we haven't had a solid strategy for contracting and the resources and the tools that our contracting people need. So I think that's a key one for us to focus on. It's the first one that we identified. We're making progress. We're not there yet. The other one, I think, and we talked about this early on as well, it's a complicated one because we have multiple unions, because we have different sort of needs. But the facilities maintenance, the facilities management program seems to me a place where we can look for some consolidation and some shared resource activities. I think we can get staff that can clean a room in a school as well as they could clean a room at a rec center. I think that plumbers are plumbers. They can do plumbing in municipal buildings and school buildings. Electricians can do electrical work in either of those places. And I think that we've got room in that area. That is a harder problem, but as we're going through the school facilities project, that's a conversation that I hope we can progress and bring to fruition. The values there are fairly high. How many maintenance folks have you got this year? 5. We have none. So I don't know whether there's any slack in that workforce? If there is, I'd love to figure out how to, do right by employees, but figure out how to tap some of that so that we're not paying contract electricians and plumbers and tradesmen. If we can do that in-house, if we've got folks in-house who have excess capacity, in-house meaning school and municipality, there may be savings there. Other areas for, possible collaboration, nothing else jumps out at me as a readily, maybe personnel to some extent. There's some activities in personnel that are somewhat generic, and we might be able to do some work there. But it's the workforce is very different in the school department than it is on the municipal side. There's specialties that, a personnelist on the school side would have to be up to speed on that wouldn't necessarily be the case on the municipal side. In the same way on the municipal side, dealing with police officers and teachers is just different. So while you could consolidate some of those services, you can't necessarily use a personnelist who deals with teachers and have them working with the police as well. It's a team if you're going to do that kind of thing. Actual savings, very, very hard to predict. I can tell you the contracting one for me seems to be the one that has the greatest potential for savings, in part because of the potential for cost avoidance. The facilities consolidation probably has the most concrete number. You can actually talk about man hours and the amount of labor put into the task in each of the buildings. But it's a complicated, that's a complicated problem to resolve or to sort of work through and solve.
There other questions?
Did I shock anybody on the other side with those suggestions? No. Okay.
All right. Well, I did the math. It was a 0.9% increase per year in the school budget since 2015, 2016, just for everybody's reference. Would we like to move on to the next agenda item?
Can I just share one quick thing, and I can send this link? There is the transparency portal that some towns participate in, where they're working to share out data. But and then they also take the data that we report. And so this is 2017 data. So you had asked about the share from the towns versus the local, and so this is So it's not a report, you run it, and then you can kind of hover over. So it says Barrington, Bristol, Charleston. So it has all the different towns, and these blue bars are the property tax. It's 2017, but like South Kingstown, this is 89.7. So it's in the similar ballpark of what the trend has been, the trend. And then the orange bar is the gray bar is the state aid. So the first bar is Barrington. So we see like local is on them for 93%. And then the state aid is at 2%. So it's a kind of nice way. I knew I had seen it when you had asked before. So this is what I had looked at. So this is a link, and you can run all different kinds of reports on different municipalities, but this one is nice because it shows all the towns. So I can share this link, see the difference from town to town.
Thank you, that'd be great.
So, Mr. President, before we leave this item, I would like to just make one note, and I just have to put it out there. We are still in the process of finalizing the municipal budget. So while the numbers that we've seen in the school budget are numbers that we think we can work with without any difficulty, we're not to the point where I can tell you I can accept, a proposal as is, and we're good to go. We need to get to the final number in the next few days, and we'll be able to provide in the manager's proposed on March 1st this or something I hope very close to this.
Right, I think so. So I know we did sort of talk about the operation coordination collaboration, but I think we kind of skipped number 3 with the school facilities program, or was that in-depth enough in the discussion?
Well, the item was on the agenda because it's been such a hot topic. This is the council and the committee's meeting, whatever your pleasure is here. I'm happy to sort of give a summary of where we've been, where we are, where we go. And, Linda and I talk about this regularly. We were in a meeting this afternoon talking about it. We'll be in a meeting on Saturday afternoon talking about it. We can talk about this all day long. What's the pleasure of the council and committee?
Rob, can you provide us of a summary of where we're at currently? What's taken place as of most recently?
Sure. So I have done this summary going all the way back to 2017, and I can start there because I think it's helpful. Not everybody has heard it. Some folks around the table have heard it a million times. Some folks around the table have lived it more than once, I'm sure. But in 2017, the council asked the school committee to go back and look at its facilities and look for efficiency, see if there was a way to reduce the expenditure on buildings, because if you can reduce the expenditure on buildings, that frees money up for educational program. When the school committee started looking into that, they went and hired an architect, RGB Architects, which then hired a subcontractor, Legacy Education LLC, Legacy Education Planning Group LLC, which was a New York company that focuses on sort of figuring out what the educational program that you've got in mind for your community would look like if you built buildings around that educational program. You understand what I meant there. That resulted in a sort of visioning exercise that lasted several months. Members of the community, teachers, students were engaged in conversations about what they would like to see school facilities look like and how that would augment the education of kids. That produced a recommendation from the Educational Legacy Planning Group that consisted of 4 options. The 4 options, I'm not going to get the 4 options exactly right, but the 4 options essentially were variations on the number of schools that should be closed. The program that Legacy put together said we need fewer schools, and the recommendations were either close an elementary school or an elementary and a middle school, but some number of schools should be reduced. There was a vote at the time by the then school committee that said we're going to close Curtis Corner and Wakefield Elementary. There was an election after that, and it was clear from the election results that closure of Wakefield was an unpopular idea, so this current school committee came up with a new strategy, a new plan, which really was just to close down Curtis Corner. That became the basis for a facilities plan. Now, facilities plans are 5-year plans required by the State of Rhode Island Department of Education. You have to have a 5-year facility plan if you're going to seek state reimbursement for any school project. So every 5 years, you have to come up with a new plan that describes the work that you anticipate doing over the next 5-year period. If it's not in your plan, you can't get state reimbursement on that work. So the plan that was submitted last February, was it last February? Boy, it seems like forever ago. Last February, called for the closure of Curtis Corner, the renovation of the high school, an addition, 2 additions actually, to the Broad Rock Middle School, and some rehabilitation, some 21st century open space learning spaces in each of the 4 elementary schools. The State of Rhode Island Department of Education looked at that application and declined to recommend it to the Board of Education for funding or for reimbursement. They said, we don't think this plan is going to do the things that we need it to do, so we're going to recommend that you go back, have another whack at it, and submit your application again in the fall. Why they kicked that back is really largely unknown. They found faults with the application that may have been the result of the writing of the application. There's been some indication from the state that they found fault in the actual plan itself. I had heard from state officials directly that they were not huge fans of the idea of maintaining the high school that we've got because of site constraints and because of the building just being big. The building on Columbia Street is actually bigger than we need for the student body there today, if you look at the gross square footage of the building. And yet we were proposing to add more square footage even though our student population is declining. So it's already too big, and you want to make it bigger for fewer students. There was some suspicion about that strategy. I can't say that that's what was driving the state's rejection of the application, but it was certainly one of the concerns that was expressed about the application. The other concerns were, that the application had flaws, that it had multiple statements about square footage and about elements of the buildings. It wasn't a clear and well-written application. It is what it is. Anyway, the application was rejected. Faced with that rejection, the school committee went to the school building committee and said, well, no, I take it back. The school building committee came to the school committee and said, while you've got the time, do you want us to look into whether or not a new high school could be constructed at Curtis Corner? The school committee, by a vote of 4-3, if I remember correctly, did approve investigating whether a new high school, a completely new structure, could be built at Curtis Corner. That would have called for the demolition of the existing Curtis Corner building and the construction of a completely new building just behind where the existing Curtis Corner middle school is. That project had come back with an estimated cost of $120 million and was deemed by the school building committee to be beyond the financial ability of the community. A brief report summarizing that and that report, we had a relatively short period of time in which the building committee was trying to get a report back to the school committee. It was not a perfect, sort of detailed, run everything absolutely to ground, but a summary report explaining why that site wouldn't work. A report that also described a brief investigation into whether or not Broad Rock Middle School could be expanded into a high school. That idea fell largely on the problem of there only being one access road to the high school and concerns about Broad Rock just not being able to carry the traffic. That report went to the school committee, and we were back on track with the original plan. We can't build a new high school, so we're going to have to renovate the high school at Columbia Street. Linda came on board into the middle of that process, and I'll characterize it for you. She wasn't feeling the love. She wasn't feeling anybody in the community saying, yeah, this is the project we want. We're so psyched. We're delighted that we're going to be spending money on this old building that is obsolete in many ways, but functionally obsolete for our teachers and students. What about, if we can't do a $120 million project at Columbia Street, what about building an addition to Curtis Corner? If we can't build a $120 million new building at Curtis Corner, let's not demolish the old building. Let's build an addition to that building and see if that works. This project actually has an advantage over the new structure because you're working with an existing structure that's already serviceable. So just that component changes the economics of the project dramatically. The school committee recommended to the, maybe the other way around on this one, the school committee recommended to the building committee that they investigate whether or not this was feasible, working with RGB and now a project manager who was hired by the school committee and working with the school building committee, Peregrine, which is a property management, construction management firm, serving as our owner's rep here in South Kingstown. we're told to go off and figure out whether or not a project could be built as an addition to the Curtis Corner Middle School. This was a different project, though. Going into this project, the question wasn't, what will it cost to do this thing? The question posed was, what can you do at this location with this building and in addition for $62 million? Because if that's what we're going to expend at Columbia Street, what would we get for that same amount at Curtis Corner? And the idea there really was, Linda's idea here was, we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck. If we're going to spend $62 million at Columbia Street and nobody's going to be happy and it's not going to meet our educational needs, the money is better spent at Curtis Corner getting a facility that is flexible and has the spaces that our educators and teachers are actually asking for. So we're now in the process of RGB and Peregrine getting to a detailed project description for that, under those constraints and for that location. Damn.
Stan, let people know where the...
So the application is due now on September 19th, 2020. We may be able to submit an application prior to that date, but the Rhode Island Department of Education has a deadline for submission of applications of September 19th and approvals by the Education Commission in November. It's the third week of November. They would let us know whether or not that application has been approved. The School Building Committee has asked the council, and this will be on a council agenda not next Monday but soon, has asked the council to consider going to bond referendum this November, about 2 weeks before we know the result of RIDE's review of the application. So that's going to be a debate that the council has to engage in the next probably month. That's everything I know, I think.
Does it matter when we're going to get the response from RIDE, whether we submit the application early?
It doesn't. So long as the state legislature would allow us to go to referendum, the only thing it does is it gives the voters the knowledge that the application, which should be, we should know what the application looks like long before we go to referendum. But the voters will not know whether or not the state finds the proposal acceptable. And therefore, the voters will not know whether or not the state agrees to fund half of the project. And that's a big deal. I mean, that matters, I suppose. On the other hand, if we were not to receive 50% reimbursement from the state of Rhode Island, we couldn't afford this project and we wouldn't do it. We'd have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, we don't. Just because we have the authorization doesn't mean we have to.
But I do think it's important to note that our administration has been in close contact with RIDE, and Christine Lopes-Metcalf, who is the head of the building projects for RIDE, has attended building committee meetings and also school committee meetings. And the feedback that we've gotten is that this is the project that they've been waiting for, and this is a project that would be a 50% or 50% reimbursement project. So that's been made very clear to us. So I do think that's important. And of course, we don't have a signed, sealed, and delivered document. But the worst thing that could happen is that the bond is put on the ballot and then we aren't approved. And really no harm, no foul. But it at least is putting it on the ballot where the most voters, the most representation would happen in a general election.
So communities do it both ways. I mean, there have been communities in Rhode Island in the last couple of years that have gone to referendum before getting approval and have continued to have successful projects, and there are communities that have waited until after approval and have gone on to successful projects. I don't think it tells us much about whether or not a project's going to be successful. What tells us about whether a project is going to be successful is the design, is the contracts, and is the management structure to make sure that we get what we contracted for. The other thing I want to note, I jumped from $62 million to $85 million. I should explain for folks who haven't been watching this closely. The difference between $62 million for a high school at Curtis Corner and $85 million, which is the total anticipated cost of the school facilities and program, includes at this point $17 million in improvements at Broad Rock, 2 additions, I'll come back to that in a second, and improvements at the elementary schools. Part of what we're doing at this point, though, is working to see if we can shift funding away from the Broad Rock project and toward building a better cushion for a high school project at Curtis Corner. Right now, the contingency built into the Curtis Corner High School project is only 8%. It's not very much, and I'm concerned about that. Linda's been working closely with RGB. I've been on the sidelines a little bit because I tend to get grumpy when I'm with RGB. But that is proceeding, and I think we're going to end up with a more flexible project because of those conversations.
Any questions on the facilities process at this point? You're good. I think that sort of brings us to the end of our items up here. Item 5 is other matters of interest and concern. I noticed that our podium is not set up as it normally is. And so you've been listening to this conversation tonight. If you have something to add, please do. I will put a 5-minute time frame on these comments. Or if there's nobody to speak, that's okay too. All right. Thank you for your patience. So, first come, first serve. State your name for the record, please.
So, Roland Benjamin. A couple of things I want to point out that didn't come through in any of this stuff. We hear a lot about the increase in spending isn't tracking with inflation. If you remember last year, I talked about last year's budget. The current year spending at the time was tracking ahead. We had a structural deficit. In that year, this year the opposite's happening, and a lot of the things that have happened, what we heard Linda talk about is the idea that they live the budget every day. You can see that in the financial update that they put out every month. They're tracking well ahead. Now, with the number they're projecting for the end of this year, it's $62.4 million, I think, is the spending on that last update that we just saw on Tuesday. So the budget request is $64.4 million. That's a $2 million increase in spending. We can go through all the revenue numbers all day, but this is a $2 million spending increase, which is over 3%. You described that history of last year. We saw that. We know this happens all the time. It happens in the private world. It happens in the public world. After we cross that milestone and create the new tax for the current year, there's no going back. And then that becomes the baseline for several years. In fact, I think Rory mentioned something about compounding interest. That's going to happen again. We came through that very difficult, unnecessarily difficult budget with all the cuts and all those discussions that were going on to find not only were there $512,000 found, but in addition, with some diligence and actions from the new administration, another 400,000 in projected surplus. It's almost, short answer is, last year we taxed $1 million more than we needed to achieve the exact same results that we're getting this year. And now we're adding $2 million in spending in the ask. We may be working towards efficiencies. We may be able to realize some, and I know that there's some programs that we've heard about that have some real opportunity. But we're still going to tax as if we're going to spend $2 million more than we're spending in the current year. So that's all I want to say.
Gary Chapman. I just wanted to talk about the money also that was found. It seems to me that the way the projected budget, this year's budget's going to end, I guess, is about $31,000 surplus. But the council president had said about we're all forgetting about the $700,000 that the state aid is reduced, but I don't think we're forgetting about it. I think the thing is that we found $500,000 last June after their budget was approved. What happened to that $500,000? Where is it? It's spent. Okay, that money could have been not spent. I mean, they built the school department. As a taxpayer, I expect when they come in here with the budget, they build their budget and staffing with what they expect. It was approved, probably more than what was expected. And yet, when they found the $500,000, they spent it. Why didn't they carry it over knowing that state aid was going to be reduced the next year? They didn't. So I think it falls on deaf ears as taxpayers when you say state aid is reduced, because when you find surplus money in the budget and you spend it, then, you know, we had a difficult time. We were looking at public safety issues, for the South Shore area, and you guys had to come up with funds to help save that and reduction in debt, and this still happened. So I think as a taxpayer, I'm a little disappointed in what that's happening. And as far as the enrollment decreases, the schools, I mean, we have Wakefield Elementary School and Matunic School half empty, and Ms. Kaminsky says that, we have a plan. And I understand we have a plan. But the plan, anybody can have a plan, but it's not going to be executed for several years. We still have to fund these empty schools for another 2 or 3 years. Why? We need to have a plan that helps taxpayers out right now. Thanks.
Sorry about that, Gary. If you would like to make a comment, you can make a comment. Do not address it at the audience, if you please, just comment. Do you have a comment, Emily? Other public comments? While we wait, I would just say, I think what the school committee did with that found $500,000 was reduce the number of cuts they had to make. I think they were probably looking at about 40 staff cuts, and they went down to 35. Also, I would just note that the increase in this budget from last year's budget is approximately $500,000, which is not.
All right, so Doral Beasley, good to see you guys.
Welcome.
It's just, I'm sitting back there listening to all you guys twist yourselves into knots trying to validate this budget, town budget. Okay, so in the paper there was Mr. Collins had, I think you were on the subcommittee this year, the budget subcommittee, right?
Yes.
Okay, and in the paper you said we should look at the FTE number to see whether or not over time we've been keeping up with the drop in enrollment. Well, the answer to that is no, we haven't. I'll send something out to you guys tomorrow, but I didn't have enough time to get it ready. But so I went back to the year you mentioned in there. It was the year we had the most employees. It was 2002. We had 620 employees. That was the second year that Broad Rug was opened up. The first year they brought the fifth graders in, and then the next year they brought another fifth grade class, and then the fifth graders became sixth graders. So the whole place was open. 620 people were working in there, and the enrollment for the district was 4,344. The projected enrollment for this coming September is 2,801. So that's a 35% drop in our enrollment over 18 years. 35% drop. So if I take that ratio, that number, and apply it to the 620 employees, now I can tell you how many employees we should have if we kept up with a drop in enrollment. Well, that number would be in September, it would be 400 on the nose, 400. So right now we have projected to have 444.6 people here. The differential is 44.44 FTE. And come September, looking at your budget, it's going to cost per FTE in this town $111,686 per FTE. So I don't break them down into, custodians and teachers' aides and then whatever. I just lump the whole thing in. I take all your wages, all your benefits, add them together, divide by the number of employees, it averages out. So those 44.44 people that we would need if we'd kept up with the enrollment drop, it's $5 million. At $111,686 per FTE in September, we'll have $5 million worth of people here that maybe we shouldn't have. Actually, it's way more than that. Because that just brings us back to the ratio that it was in 2002, which was 7 students per employee. This year we're at 6.36. We're lower than we were then. And 2 years before 2002, in 2000, the year before Broad Rug opened up, we had 519 people working here. And 3 years earlier, our high school won their second academic decathlon in a row. And the ratio then was 8.4 students per employee. We have way too many people working here. Now, how are they doing though, all these people? We got a lot of people here. So you can look at this thing here. Okay, in December, Ms. Savastano gave she brought out and discussed the star ratings, the ratings our schools got this year. I read it in the paper and I was a little mystified because I don't think, maybe it was just the way it was written, But when I first read it, I go, holy cow. It seemed like we were throwing our students with disabilities and our American Indian students under the bus. Because that's basically what it said. It said we have these subgroups of students in our schools, and how they're performing is keeping everybody down, and that's why we don't have good star ratings. Well, this right here it blows that into oblivion, okay? So I thought that was so messed up, I had to find out. So I called RIDE, talked to Scott Gauslin, who's the head of the department
Mr. Beasley.
that creates this stuff. I know. You may have to call 911 tonight, have me removed.
Can I just ask if there's somebody else who wants to speak first?
Sure.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak tonight? All right.
Thank you. All right, so these are 7 pages here. And what they show is the star ratings for each of our schools for the first year, 2018, and then this year, 2019. Now, when you look at them, the arrow to the left of each one of these blocks, the arrow shows what we got that year. So here's Matunic. Last year, we got a 2-star school. This year, they're up to a 3. And then you can go to page after page, and there's Peacedale, and Peacedale were 4-star schools both years, and on and on. Now, but wherever you see like the highlighted thing here and like the orange, that's what that school could have received those for whatever year if there was one thing different. It was all based on what our students did on the test in English language arts and math. So the bottom line is it was their performance on the test in what they were supposed to have learned is the reason why we didn't have 4- and 5-star schools. Not because of subgroups dragging our schools down. That's what the NEA doesn't want you to know. They don't want the public to know that it's the people that are working in the schools. Supposedly, we hear from them all the time, and what they say is, it's the teachers that count, It's not the school, it's the teachers. Not here, it isn't. It's not the teachers that count on this. Because we have so many people working this, I don't even know what they do. Mr. Benjamin made a graph, I wish he'd had it, made a graph showing from your stuff about how much we're spending per student, or per school per student. Last year, Wakefield was crazy, right? Like $23,000 a student in Wakefield last year. $23,000. Come November, or come September, if we don't fix this mess, we're going to be spending $23,000 for every student in this district. We're not going to be able to afford a high school. We should be building a new high school, a totally new high school. We can afford to do that, but what we can't afford is to pay people that are not doing their jobs. I'm going to say it right now, they're not doing their jobs. They're not. Can you tell me they're doing their jobs by looking at that? Just a couple of comments that people were making. You said members of the community have a burden, or the burden might be too great. Yeah, the burden is going to be too great if we don't get our costs under control in our schools. The return on an investment that we've spent for the last 20 years in this town there's no way you can, there's absolutely no way you can justify it.
Thank you.
Jim O'Neill, Matunic. Just a couple, I hope, easy questions to answer. Page 21, students with disabilities. About 13% of our total population, 377 kids. Are those all the kids with IEPs, or is there a different number than the 377 you have here? So, okay. Can you tell me what share of this current year budget that is of the budget, those 377 kids, the programs for them? I saw, yeah, I know it's not broken down. Okay.
This is the microphone.
Yeah.
Over there.
No, I just didn't know if we were, follow many of the state's averages. Do we have much more of a percentage out of our gross budget for the kids?
I need to double check it, but for the most part, when I've checked in the past, the 13%, the number of students is compatible to the percentage of the budget that's special ed.
Okay. All right, so maybe, but you will come up with a number if it's 20%, 22, 25% of the. Okay. On page 23, you talked about all staff in the current year down 7.37%. Can you give me a numeric? Can you give me a number? What that represents? Everybody's got their phones out. Where if we had a number rather than a percentage, it'd be very easy. Pardon?
5.2.
Minus 7.37% in the current year, 2019-2020, page 23. Just how many of the staff is that? That's under the all staff number.
It was around 35.
Oh, it's 35, what, 34.2.
All right, so we're operating this year with 34.2 less staff.
Than the year before.
Okay. And 34.2. So with the current projections for anticipated staffing needs of 444.6, is that pretty much even?
5.2 reduction.
5.2 more reduction, okay. And so my question might be, holy cow, 34 staff, less staff now, and I don't know what certified versus all the way down to maybe maintenance folks, but are we looking at $3 million of cost savings there in terms of salary and benefits? I guess what I'm getting at is this current year budget. Pardon?
Are you looking at last year's budget or the budget we're proposing?
I'm just looking at right now, down 7.37%.
Which is
so
5.2
operating
staff.
with 34.2 fewer people. So that should be about $3 million minus disabilities, insurance, and health care would have to carry over. So I don't know why this year's budget we're considering isn't lower by $2 million minimum.
The cut, the 35 was part of last year's budget. That was last year's budget. Last year's budget, we cut $3.8 million.
Okay, but why aren't we moving forward with a current need starting at least $2 million less, if not $3 million less?
We are.
Well, I guess that'll be another day. They'll have to figure that one out. But I don't see it in the numbers here because we should be starting off this year's budget $2 to $3 million left. I'm using $2 million because we'd have to pay for for their health care if they don't get jobs, forwarding jobs, so on and so forth. So this budget should be just $2 million lower on its, on its basis. So I don't understand that. So that's really something that we need to figure out. I'm not an accountant, but there's something wrong here that we're not starting this new year with a budget that's at least $2 million less, if not $3 million.
Jim, the 35 positions were cut last year.
Right.
So this year, the budget that we're looking at now, that staffing level is remaining relatively level. Did you just say to me 5 positions maybe? So this year's budget should reflect 5 positions less in the salaries.
All right.
Then there's contractual obligations.
All right, so
Now the
18, 19,
35
all right, I'm not disagreeing, but 18, 19, 19, 20, I don't see that $3 million reduction.
You would have seen the reduction between 18 and, between 19 and 20 is where you would have seen the reduction.
All right.
You won't see it between 20 and 21 because we're only going down 5.
I understand.
Okay.
But 2018 fiscal year, 2019 fiscal year, I would have thought that would have started to be at least $3 million less.
Where you would have seen the 35 person.
But I don't see the $3 million reduction.
It's there. So if you look on the 2-page, if you look in the expense, the salary line item for 2019 was $34 million for the actual. The projected for 2019 is $32 million. The proposed budget from the superintendent is slightly up at 33.9. For this, that's just salaries. Benefits are.
I just thought it would be a lot greater if you looked at a $100,000 average of salary, benefits, everything else times 34.2. That's $3.4 million.
You're right.
You can't get me to this number at the moment.
No, actually, I think the explanation is twofold. One, you end up with that reduction last year, and the number this year is up $1 million, so you're not seeing $2 million, you're seeing $1 million reduction. The explanation is that contractual obligations for benefit increases and salary increases is that $1 million.
Okay, because I attended all these meetings last year, and no one talked about that. It was kind of very, very interesting budget. Of course, last year we had other problems. And the last bit of housekeeping is a very simple question. I ask this every year, but what is the number of homeschooled kids we have in South Kingston?
Run the report and get that to you. We can actually do it tonight.
Okay, but you don't have that.
I can look it up. I just don't want to.
Okay, no.
I'm happy to run that.
Okay, no, that's all right. We'll
we have a high. It's high.
In time. Okay, I just wanted to see if it did. I think we reached a high of 45, maybe 48, 50 over the last couple of years ago. I just would like to know where it is now, because that's certainly a reflection of these parents who have been here, parents moved here, and having their kids they prefer to homeschool. I'd really like to know that trend.
I agree. We do have had a number that have returned as well.
Yeah, both. Yeah, yep. Yep. No, a net number would be great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Sweet from Wakefield. My questions, I guess, for Rob. I know the facilities plan that we have coming up. It doesn't address any of the municipality buildings, and I don't know that we have had any evaluation of all of our buildings. And if something, if there was an evaluation and in 5 years it says $100 million, we're caught.
You're exactly right. We're in the process. I've asked the maintenance supervisor to look at all of our buildings using the same facilities condition index scheme that Jacobs used when they did the evaluation of schools statewide. It's a pretty standard measure of the condition of a building. It's not complicated. It's easy enough for us to put together. And he, between doing all of the other things he's doing, is slowly making progress on a full assessment of our building inventory. We don't have any reason to believe that we have a catastrophic problem anywhere in the system, but you're right. It's what you don't see, it's what you don't know that gets you. And we haven't had a chance to investigate every component of every building. I'm worried about it. It's one of the reasons I've asked him to go out and do that condition baseline for all of our buildings. We're going to have to get to a program similar to the program that I hope we get to on the schools, which is a very detailed, specific facilities plan for maintenance and improvements. I sound sort of geeky when I talk about contracts and facilities, but those are, for me, core functions of government, and you're right, we've got to get that right. I'm not hyper concerned that we're eating all of the capacity of the municipality. One of the reasons that the $85 million benchmark has been set, and why I've been so adamant that we really, really have to be careful, there's two reasons. One, I think that above $85 million, we begin to do harm to individual taxpayers who are vulnerable, who are price sensitive to taxes. And the other is we do need to have some capacity left for the municipality to deal with unexpected needs for bonding. We will have some capacity even after a school project and even after the $6.5 million that I've recommended the council put to referendum for infrastructure improvements. There are some clear infrastructure improvements. We mentioned some of our buildings we know are already bad. The facilities, the restroom facilities at Old Mountain Field have been on our plan for upgrade for years. We need to get that project done. Some of our infrastructure is not a building, but the boat ramp is in deplorable condition. It needs to be upgraded. We have other infrastructure needs in the community. The road infrastructure in South Kingstown, the road infrastructure in Rhode Island is abysmal, and we need to start addressing those concerns. Those compete, you're right, with the school facilities. We're trying to make sure that we get to a project that works for the schools, that doesn't overburden individual taxpayers and doesn't consume all of our capacity to take care of unforeseen problems. Meanwhile, hopefully if we get a $6.5 million bond to do some infrastructure projects now, accelerate some of the road projects and take care of some of the very obvious, the bathrooms at Old Mountain Field, the boat launch. If we take care of some of those very obvious problems, we'll get some breathing room and we'll be able to come up with a real good asset management program for everything else. The roads are our biggest problem. I mean, we've got more than $100 million worth of road repair that could be done next year if we had the money and the people and the equipment. We don't, we won't, we can't. That's not in the cards. We're going to have to design a road program that's more aggressive than what we have been doing, I think, but I don't see the school project as crowding us out of that possibility in the future. Again, part of the strategy has got to be for us to figure out how to make sure that the $2.5 million worth of debt service associated with an $85 million bond isn't just, oh, well, that's off to the side, we can forget about it. We've got to pay attention to that interest payment as if it were just as big a part of the program as everything else. It is. It's got to be paid, and we've got to deal with it as real. It's not play money. It's not invisible. It's got to be real.
Do you know if the evaluation of the properties that would need attention, or possibly need attention, will be done before the bond would be voted on?
No, not completely, but I will say this. We're under construction for the EMS facility at the Department of Public Works, or Department of Public Services building on Route 1. So I know the condition there. That's not too bad. We know this building because we crawl all over the roof on this building. We deal with all sorts. We were up on the roof doing the surrounds on the peak this summer. We have a real good sense of the condition of this building. The rec center is brand new. The senior center has had roof work and has had HVAC work done recently. We understand that condition. We're pretty comfortable with that building, and we're pretty comfortable with the adult daycare over on just off Route 1. That building is probably one of our weaker buildings in terms of quality of construction. It's challenging, but again, nothing catastrophic coming our way. So I don't have anything that I'm really worried about. The depot over on Asa Pond Road, those buildings are, steel structures. They're easy to see what's going on because if you see rust on the supporting members, you know it. So I'm not too worried about it. I don't think we're in tough shape. The police department, which is, one of our newest, but also getting to that point in its life cycle that you begin to worry about it, our maintenance supervisor has been stationed in that building for years now, knows the building intimately. We go through it all the time. It's in pretty damn good shape. It's been well maintained. It's a really rock solid building. It's in good shape.
I'm not sure if I'm hearing a second or third hand, to be honest, but isn't the police station looking to do something fairly large there? Or is that, I'm hearing something wrong?
You may be hearing something I don't know about. Oh, maybe. So maybe the radio.
No, not the radio.
An antenna project. We're
No, it's something with the building itself that they again,
they haven't come to me yet. Maybe they're afraid to bring the number. I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
But again, nothing that anybody has said is catastrophic. Nothing failing that is a huge problem.
I think all these figures would be extremely important to know before you go to bond, because catastrophic has different meanings to different people.
I actually worry more about the long-term program than the buildings we've got. We would be in a better position if we had a EMS service that was further south. And we'd be better off if we had an EMS station to the north. The ideal configuration for EMS in South Kingstown really is URI's doorstep, up next to the Kingston Fire Department, for example, down in Matunic, at the Matunic Fire Station, for example, and somewhere in the middle, the police station or Old South Road School. Those are the ideal places for us to be positioned. Those are all multi-million-dollar projects.
Like I said, I just think it's important to have, obviously not right to the penny, but a pretty good feeling for what it could be before that bond comes out. So everybody has a clear picture of what could be in 5 years.
So on the EMS stations, we've got pretty good numbers. I have a pretty good sense of what we would have to do, and there may be an opportunity there at some point soon.
I think in the meantime, I would point toward the capital improvement program, which is a 6-year outlook for capital improvements. Any other comments tonight?
Jim O'Neill again. I assume the 20-year bond will be a level principal, declining interest, or is there a different method of financing the state might decide they'd like to see?
The state isn't going to mandate how we finance it. They're flexible. We're going to weigh several different options that will have the best impact. So right in the capital plan that was presented, it was level principal with declining interest as the most with a conservative interest rate of 4%.
Okay.
We think if we go out in November of 2020, we can get a better bond rating because of where we're at, where the market is at today. And as a result, that will give us some flexibility in looking at different options, whether it's level debt instead of level principal, almost like a mortgage, so it's a little more in interest, but it may still be advantageous to take it out. We could actually go out and look at, instead of 20 years, 25 years, there are several options that we will weigh before we.
So the state would allow possibly a 30-year
I don't know if they would
maturity?
allow 30 years, because you have to start looking at the useful life, the economic, but they may allow 25.
Okay. How far is it possible to finance, put the bonds out for sale like a tax anticipation note? I know that's only a year, but a 20-year bond anticipation note. But can you, in advance of this being approved by RIDE, our building plans, or does it has to be finalized there before, then we all have to hit the market at the same time?
Depends on it would have to be the legislation, and we'd have to talk to RIDE to make sure they would allow us to do that, to go out and pre-fund the debt almost, and then come back and reimburse it.
I only bring that up because how many other communities will all be wanting to do we're all going to hit the market at the same time. Is that possible?
I mean, the good thing for us is we're one of the few communities that have an excellent bond rating, so I think we'll be attractive to the market. And because of our demographics and our economic outlook, I think there will be a definite audience. And we may, if we do go in earlier, we may be able to get out to market before other communities because we're all in a stage, they've staged them.
Okay, last question. Any threat to our Moody's and Fitch's rating with our new financing?
I can't speak to them, but I think we would be okay. We definitely have the capacity. They're going to look at it, from a very global standpoint. I don't think we'd see a negative impact on our rating.
Okay, well, probably will depend on our operational budgeting.
All discussions with our fiscal advisors, they don't anticipate a negative outlook.
All right, thank you.
Jim, just the two constraints that we'd have to deal with on the bond timing. The referendum has to come first. We don't have any authority to issue bonds until we've got the referendum.
Right.
And the other piece is RIDE's approval is such that you don't get approval for debts you've already incurred. They have to approve it before it's reimbursable. So it has to be done in that sequence. Okay. We're kind of stuck with it. I think your point's right. I think everybody's going to hit the market at the same time. But
okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hey.
There are 28, last reported were 28 at-home instructed students.
Okay, so it sounds like that's down net-wise over the last few years. I think we had gotten well above 40 a few years ago. All right. Well, that sounds good. Thank you.
This is a question I'm hoping that the school department can answer the next time you guys meet. Do this. All right. So last year you had 485, almost 486 people working here. And now you started the year with 454. And I think I saw somewhere you're down to 450. I don't know if that's true or not, but so you've lost between 31 and 35 employees. So for me, that's like, it's at least, it's approaching $3 million worth of salary and benefits that come off the table. It could be as much as like $3.5 million came off when all those people left now. But you're asking for $1 million more in your budget than you did last year. How is that possible? How can you take $3 million off your balance and then ask for another $1 million more than you asked for last year? That's what I want to hear an answer for next time.
So part of the answer has to be just contractual increases. When you're looking at $2.5 million on, or I'm sorry, 2% on $35 million worth of payroll, you're getting there.
If that's the case, then what is the increase for the salaries this year in this budget that you put together? What is the percentage increase that?
So, custodians 2.25, clerical staff 2%. Teachers, we are in negotiations, so We do have a placeholder, which at this point,
Is it in the budget?
it is in the budget.
Then you have to reveal it.
No, we can't.
Yeah, you have to. We have a ruling from the Attorney General's office that you have to reveal it.
There's also a problem with respect to the Labor Board and publicly negotiating.
Well,
There would also be an issue with the Labor Board and publicly negotiating at that point.
I'll show you the response that we got. Okay? But it's in the budget. Okay.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any more comments. Any comments up here at the table? All right. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for the presentation. I think in reviewing the budget, I mean, it's been a pleasure to serve on the budget subcommittee, for one thing, and to see the development of this budget on a much more personal level. But I think, I can't speak for the whole council. I think everybody realizes that this is a better budget than we've seen in years past. And I appreciate, keeping it to 2% in terms of property tax transfer, and a 0.76% increase in the overall budget is impressive. So we look forward to continuing the discussions, and we'll see you next time.
Mr. President, before we go, just one thing you folks are going to see on the agenda, and everybody should be aware of it. We are going to market with $4 million worth of bonds for the school department, most likely next month. These are the monies that were authorized in 2014. The work for that, with those monies, has been done. It was the improvements to the HVAC systems and roofs. But we're going to market. There will be a discussion about this on Monday night's agenda. So this is different money. It's old money, and we got to go issue it. It will be new money, right?
All right. Thank you, Rob. Have a good night, everybody.